boys and girls. I am not the nation's leading infectious disease control expert. However, at a recent candidate forum in Northern Virginia that I had the privilege and opportunity to attend in a safe online forum, because being safe in pandemic is imperative. An introductory lesson to the basic concepts in civics was found to be a very useful way to educate participants and viewers to better inform them about their role in fulfilling their duties as a responsible adult citizen. And I thank the Arlington NAACP for that wonderful opportunity. And especially for those involved in medical practice, I have recently been reminded by many public health professionals of the necessity to test the sincerity of those engaged in their duties and responsibilities. So, with this in mind, this instructional video will hopefully enable you to check your facts. And what better way to introduce the topic of infectious disease control, a very exciting topic for myself, than to use a familiar example rather than to attempt to introduce totally new concepts and terms that may not be familiar or even confusing. So, for the next few minutes, we shall attempt to familiarize viewers with the concepts of infectious disease control using the example of pregnancy and sexual intercourse, and those things that most responsible adults use every day to better understand your role in prevention of spreading deadly disease, particularly during this time of great public health crisis of concern to us all. So please sit back, relax, enjoy, and if you so require, feel welcome to take notes as we present our latest production, Look, My Mom's Having a Novel Coronavirus. Personally, I always find it useful to begin with situations with which my audience has some familiarity, don't you? And at least in Northern Virginia, where we found a great abundance of Planned Parenthood supporters, most adults are relatively familiar with at least one landmark legal decision. One of many that for some reason almost often tend to begin their journey through the legal system in the state of Texas. And in 1973, in an opinion written by Justice Blackmun, the U.S. Supreme Court considered the following facts. Roe alleged that she was unmarried and pregnant, that she wished to terminate her pregnancy by an abortion performed by a competent, licensed physician under safe clinical conditions, as do we all, that she was unable to get a legal abortion in Texas because her life did not appear to be threatened by the continuation of her pregnancy, and that she could not afford to travel to another jurisdiction in order to secure a legal abortion under safe conditions. So using this familiar example, boys and girls, in the context of infectious disease control and disease, we could say by analogy that the appellant, who for our example we shall just call my mom, has been infected by a novel coronavirus, which was a situation with which she was not particularly satisfied or happy about. And so, wishing to rid herself of this disease condition, she then, like a reasonable person, like yourself, sought the aid and assistance of a licensed professional so that she could have a simple medical procedure performed by a competent, licensed physician under safe clinical conditions. Like so many women in this familiar fact pattern, my mom, in this example, could not afford to travel to another jurisdiction in order to secure a legal remedy to mitigate or terminate this disease condition under safe conditions. And for instructional purposes, using this example, let us just say that my mom was living in the state of Texas, where she was unable to get a legal prevention or termination procedure because her life did not appear to be threatened by the continuation of her infectious disease. And boys and girls, using the expert opinions of medical practitioners, as we should always do, use expert opinions on the front lines. In Roe v. Wade, Justice Blackmun concluded that for the stage prior to approximately the end of the first trimester, the abortion decision and its effectuation must be left to the medical judgment of the pregnant woman's attending physician. Attending physician, not just the woman alone, but the attending physician in consultation. Now, I don't know about you boys and girls, but just reading that sentence, I found a word in a phrase that may not be familiar. The abortion decision and its effectuation. And effectuation may sound a lot like efficacy and effectiveness, terms that you may have heard in the public health crisis. But one of my favorite plays and also films when I was a child was Auntie May. And she told her nephew that when he came to a word that he did not know, to look at it. And what we find is, like in synonyms, which some kids in our higher performing schools learn about very early in their educational instruction, providing them greater advantages later in life, just because words sound a lot like something with which we are familiar. They may or may not mean the same thing. And if you're in a public health crisis, not knowing something may be a big mistake. Now, for those who have taken the recommended and recently FDA-approved vaccines, certainly the terms effectiveness and efficacy are somewhat familiar, hopefully very familiar. However, for those who did not do their homework or just did not know where to look, perhaps we can utilize this opportunity to share our informed knowledge and supporters of science to inform and instruct those who probably are not quite as familiar and are afflicted with adversely with an achievement. Now, when we are developing vaccines, very, very important these days, these terms of effectiveness and efficacy are imperative to understand, because even efficacy and effectiveness do not mean the same thing at all and are not interchangeable, but rather are representative of stages in disease prevention for those engaged in the practice of helping to develop vaccines, for instance. Quite simply, for review, efficacy only means that something positive and or desirable has occurred, but does not attempt to address or even assert whether that positive good is quite enough. For instance, you may successfully complete high school, have a lot of friends, performed well on the sports teams, obtained your high school diploma, and even gotten accepted to a wonderful college. But whether or not you actually graduate is something very, very different. And if you're not concerned, certainly your mother and daddy, who may be paying for it, are very, very concerned. And so we could say that your vaccine education was efficacious at becoming a college graduate because you did get to college, but not, shall we say, very effective, having suffered, to use the term, a breakthrough infection in your high school education and diploma vaccine. That's very easy. For those who have studied Latin or advanced, you may find that the root words from which these terms, effective and efficacy, are derived is the same, or the verb form faco, facere, feci, not Fauci, feci, factum. That may sound like something, but it's not. Which literally translated is the Latin verb form of I make. But the meaning is changed substantially, at least in Latin, by the prepositions, those little letters that come before a word, or ex faco, which means out of. And that prefix of ex, like all my exes live in Texas, is shared in common in these words effective and efficacy, as well as in the term used by Justice Blackmun, who used the term effectuate. And Merriam-Webster defines this term as a transitive verb form that is defined as to cause or bring about something. Like the virus caused my infection, or to put into effect or operation. And some may be more familiar with its truncated transitive verb form of effect, but which often causes cognitive dissonance for those who confuse the transitive verb affect, which begins with an A, and effect, which begins with an E. And I like to eliminate the confusion this way for myself by using the achievement test. For example, students of color in public schools and private schools often are adversely affected with an A, experiencing adverse effects with an E, that is often affected with an E by adverse circumstances. Very easy, right? Simple to understand. But enough of that superfluous and gratuitous digression. If any of these terms, of course, are unfamiliar, then remember what Auntie Mame told her nephew. Write it down and look it up. Check your facts. And so, moving on with this lesson, let us use the familiar situation of prophylactics in the use of preventing pregnancy for my mom. We might, by analogy, say in this instance, that abstinence is a countermeasure that has been established as satisfying the effectiveness test in preventing pregnancy, because in pregnancy, infection, as you recall, is a direct function of being exposed to the spermatozoa infecting agent, and hence preventing the perceived harm absolutely. However, latex condoms, diaphragms, intrauterine devices, and oral contraceptives, which some just simply call a pill, may be effective, but certainly may not be effective, but certainly satisfy the standards of efficacy, since they have been proven scientifically to do something, and may or may not be more efficacious than other improvised methods. And perhaps you, too, have a few friends yourself who are convinced that they can enjoy sexual intercourse without concerns for safety because they have natural immunity. We may say, or may not, that this is true and valid because whether wittingly or unwittingly, these individuals may actually be sterile, lacking the capacity, and hence wholly incapable of conceiving a pregnancy through sexual intercourse, and may later prove or disprove their hypothesis of natural immunity through what we describe in science as trial and error. And in public health crisis, sometimes we find these people in hospitals wondering why they didn't take the vaccine. Thus, transferring our practical example arising from sexual intercourse between mutually consenting adults, boys and girls, we can graphically see depicted in the roles of such prophylactic measures for personal use by my mom in preventing infection from deadly disease, perhaps through the usages of medical devices, such as perhaps facial coverings, essentially most akin to the example of using a latex condom or intrauterine device, which perhaps even you yourself even daily apply when engaged in public intercourse through commerce or around others, so as to prevent the spread of deadly disease in stores, on public transit, in the movie theater, or even during worship, or perhaps even through use of vaccinations, a veritable oral contraceptive measure, except in the present case, such measures have been approved by the FDA by suspension or intramuscular injection, or taking a shot for our students on the football team. Just as over 60% of adults in Virginia, I have been informed, have volunteered without even a mandate, feeling it is their duty, feeling it is something that they have to do because of their understanding of science. Perhaps in evolving science, like science and technology has done in the field of sexual intercourse, to make it more convenient for those perhaps less apt at understanding more advanced topics. A savvy developer might one day provide an oral booster so that you need not be frightened by getting stuck by a needle, but can simply take a pill and be free from infection. And that spoonful of sugar will help the medicine go down. But for now, boys and girls, you should give yourselves a pat on the back for doing your duty in the serious business of infectious disease control, because, as I like to say, we all have a part in infectious disease. And as in drama, there are no small parts, only small actors in this ensemble cast production. And in natural selection, eventually we evolve to a more perfect species. But returning now to the point at hand, boys and girls, after that brief but I think necessary digression, in Roe v. Wade, Justice Blackmun concluded, this holding we feel is consistent, and consistency is important, with the relative weight of the respective interests involved, with the lessons and examples of medical and legal history, with the lenity of the common law, and with the demands of the profound problems of the present day. This decision leaves the state free to place increasing restrictions on abortion as the period of pregnancy lengthens, so long as those restrictions are tailored to the recognized state interest. The decision vindicates the right of the physician to administer medical treatment according to his professional judgment, up to the point where important state interests provide compelling justifications for intervention. So, we have your rights, and then suddenly you are in a little bit of trouble. You have to go to see the doctor, and then the doctor now has some responsibilities, but then even he is somewhat restricted, and the state comes in at some line of demarcation, point of departure. And up to those points, Justice Blackmun says, the abortion decision in all its aspects is inherently and primarily a medical decision. And basic responsibility for it must rest with the physician. If an individual practitioner abuses the privilege of exercising proper medical judgment, the usual remedies, judicial and interprofessional, are available. Something like getting sued for malpractice or losing your license. And this is very important as a point that builds upon our earlier discussion on what was described as viability, a very intriguing term, especially for those who share an interest in the study of science. In the last installment, we discussed my mom's infectious agent, who we, for simplicity's sake, shall call Freddy Spermatozoa. Now that's Italian. Employing a literary device known as personifications, with which some of our more advanced students are certainly familiar. And when we describe Freddy Spermatozoa in the context of viability, we recognize that Freddy, short, Freddy Krueger, for short, only possessed a potential unrealized for causing any harm in the context of pregnancy infection. Because my mom's acquaintance, Freddy, was basically lacking in full potential until he united with, let us just call her good friend Esther the 8th, a good Catholic girl. And at this juncture, my mom plays an important role in keeping Freddy's Spermatozoa and Esther the 8th, a good Catholic high school girl, in proper social distance, as they say. Moreover, this, as you see, builds on our earlier discussion on abstinence as a almost perfect, not almost, only perfect preventative measure, because infection is a direct function of having been exposed to the infected agent. And just as you can't get pregnant without sexual intercourse, you cannot be infected by a virus that is not even there, barring virgin birth, of course. The situation speaks for itself. It's just common sense, or abduction by aliens. Self-explanatory, but you'd be quite surprised by exactly how many kids miss this point on the test. But you look like an intelligent person, and I am very confident that while these seemingly confusing concepts and terms may present some cognitive difficulties to others less perspicacious than yourself, and I both know, perhaps you can use this practical instruction to better educate them who have been adversely affected by a medical education or even misinformation achievement gap. So, boys and girls, before wrapping up, let's do a quick review to help us better to recall and understand this informative presentation so that we can continue to use these lessons each day as we continue to address our current public health crisis while staying safe and free from infection. 1. Who could have thought that a Supreme Court decision with which most are generally familiar, decided all the way back in 1973, might find such relevance and significance in the current public health crisis, at least with regard to providing a bright line rule to assist in guiding us through these demanding times of evolving science, by helping us to define our individual roles in the realm of public health, unchanged and immutable, addressing roles for the government and that point of demarcation as to when it may be deemed proper for the government to intervene, and for those licensed and credentialed professionals daily engaged on the front lines in addressing our public health concerns with a line drawn in the sand, or marginal line for our history buffs, beyond which the decision of the physician is even subordinated, or to use the legal term, preempted by the authority of the state and its legitimate interests. At that dividing point of viability and legality. 2. We had an opportunity to further explore this concept of viability, at least for my mom's dear acquaintance, Freddy Spermatozoa, who is absolutely innocuous and impotent, or shall we say, poses no imminent threat or danger before his introduction to my mom's good friend, a good Catholic little girl, Esther the 8th. Especially when she is most vulnerable as a host, having failed to take proper preventative measures, perhaps misinformed by her friends or even people she trusts, or just simple ignorance. Things like wearing a mask or even getting infected, which is like getting pregnant. And this builds further on our last instructional video, where we learned or reviewed some important concepts to keep in our mental toolbox to stay safe from infection. 1. Getting infected is just like getting pregnant. 2. Viruses and exposures are very much like something with which we are all familiar in the form of spermatozoa when engaged in the performance of sexual intercourse. And viruses, like sperm, cannot reach their full potential until they are joined with a host like an egg, where they can commence the activities associated with reproduction, which in turn may find a person on the way to a hospital to correct or address the medical condition with the assistance of an expert. But that is all that we have time for right now, boys and girls, and I hope sincerely that this familiarization has assisted you in better understanding the concepts of infection and disease prevention. And in later installments of this educational video series, we shall continue to use the example of my mom, her dear friend Esther the 8th, a good Catholic high school girl, and her fond acquaintance Freddy Spermatozoa, who may not be up to any good, and whom her parents may or may not quite approve, as we continue to delve further into this most significant concept of viability, which even Justice Blackmun had found provided both logical and medically dispositive or significant in parsing the legal ramifications involved in matters of public health and the state's police powers in the very complex field of jurisprudence, for which you may wish to take a fifth or lawyer up, as they say, and consult further with your attorney, just as a reasonable person might prefer an informed choice to consult with a physician or licensed and trained medical professional on matters that pertain to their personal health, if you have an interest in continuing living. Who could imagine that this very familiar and intriguing concept of, shall we say, pregnancy might be so useful for understanding the topics of viability, and as we shall see in future instructional videos, the meaning of life, and some very basic countermeasures, some of which you may already be familiar in preventing the spread of infection, staying healthy, staying alive, staying safe, and avoiding a visit to the hospital, like my mom, who is having a novel coronavirus. Thanks so much for joining us, and see you next time. And just remember, in November, to keep Mike Webb away from our schools. This briefing is unclassified. Prevention, as we often say, is the best medicine, and sometimes abstinence is not an option. And just remember that safety very often is a woman's choice. So stay at home. And come on, man, don't forget your dang mask.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.